was reading a book recently by one of my favorite authors, Richard Rohr, Father Richard Rohr. The book is called Eager to Love, and I'd recommend it to anyone. There's this quote in there that really kind of rattled my way of seeing the world. Rohr writes this: after the Enlightenment and the creation of Newtonian physics, we went backward spiritually and started to understand all causality only in physical and efficient ways. He goes on to say, the world itself, as well as people's inner and prayer lives, then became arid and mechanical instead of juicy and enchanted. People's inner lives should be juicy and enchanted, not arid and mechanical. I love that. Okay, so I read that quote because later on in this episode, this fantastic episode, man, I love this episode. I loved recording it. You're going to hear me reference that quote, and I will completely butcher it. So I figured through the magic of, podcast stuff, I would, get it right here at the beginning. I wanted to give it the credit it was due, but that quote, it also kind of feels like it speaks, now definitely through a different spiritual language, but it seems to speak to what my guest today has to teach us. I hope your inner life feels juicy and enchanted. I hope you have a way to get in touch with the true you that is living somewhere deep down inside of you. You're going to love this episode. Hey, I'm really glad you're here. Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the Between Podcast. This is your host, Matt Matson, and I'm just so excited to spend some time with our guest today. Barbara Ann Jacques is a graceful disruptor. Man, I love that. A graceful disruptor. She helps people connect their higher selves and lead from their inner wisdom. I think it's a beautiful gift to give to people, to help people connect to their higher selves and lead from their inner wisdom. I want to start by sharing some of the lines from Barbara's bio, like her official bio. You're going to love this stuff. For years, Barbara Ann Jacques, Ph.D., led a secret life, keeping her spiritual practices separate from her professional and scientific side. But in 2014, she went into bone marrow failure. It was a dark time, losing everything she had outwardly defined herself by. She underwent a bone marrow transplant, and today her donor's DNA flows through her veins. Man, I want listeners to imagine how an experience like that might make you think about our connectedness and I guess the idea of living authentically and taking charge of shaping your life in the way you envision. Today, Barbara is an educator, a speaker, an intuitive, and an internationally best-selling co-author. Is the founder of Disrupting Gracefully. She's a coach that weaves together scientific and spiritual practices to support her clients. Barbara, thanks for being here. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Matt. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to start with a simple, I guess, practical, real life question, because I think sometimes I do this all the time in some of the work that I do, but I think it's easy to get caught up in the language we use to describe our work and not simply just tell stories about what our work does for people. So would you tell us what is a practical example in your life or in the life of someone you've worked with of what you mean when you say disrupting gracefully?
Um, so it's really just a matter of challenging. And I think sometimes we think a challenge is a bad thing, but challenge is not always a bad thing. But it's challenging the existing norms and beliefs and structures in our lives, and doing so with an approach that's mindful and rooted in a deep understanding of who we are. And I think that's where our society really fails miserably. We don't know who we are. We are all of those outer things. So it's just really about initiating change, not through force or aggression, but through that sense of inner alignment. So we can call that grace or inner alignment, God, or the universe, however you want. For me, it's grace, and it's from this state of grace and interconnectedness that we disrupt what no longer serves us and is in our highest good. And for me, it was the bone marrow transplant. It was the
Yeah.
bone marrow transplant knocking me out of my identity of Dr. Bailey, at the time it was Bailey,
Mhm.
Dr. Jakes, um, at the time, and knocking me out of that identity of all of my outer self. And so the disruption in my life came from that discernment of how can I um, step up and be fully me in each and every moment. And it changes our relationships with others. We can do this in our professional lives. I do this with clients. It's how we create our culture and our work environment. It's how we build our businesses. It's how we serve our communities. It's how we show up aligned to our highest self
Yeah,
and not preconceived thoughts of who we should be and how we should show up in life.
man, I don't want to get too literal or assume too much about your story, but you initially, I mean, just started telling me a little bit about, define being in touch with our inner self, our true self, and not the outer things that we so often define ourselves by.
Mhm.
And you have this massive, probably traumatic medical moment in your life where you have a bone marrow transplant, and suddenly there's somebody else's DNA flowing through you. Like that is an existential moment at the very least. And to literally start to think about and be aware of your inner self at a new level, as
Mhm.
opposed to all these outer things. I love that you named sort of, Dr. Bailey at the time, right? All these things that we use to define ourselves, our curriculum vitae or our resume or our titles or our jobs or our houses or our cars, or, right? And but to instead get in touch with that inner self, because again, not to get too literal, but gosh, you could literally be thinking about your inner self. What is in you? What are you made of? What is in your DNA in a
Mhm.
different way? Is that overstating that moment for you? Is that real?
Uh, it didn't happen that quickly.
Yeah.
I was forced into it. My entire life, though, I was split in two. I was professional Barb and I was spiritual Barb. So I
Mm.
always had that spiritual aspect to myself. But when I went into bone marrow failure, I found myself in the hospital for several months. And I had no other choice. For
Mm.
anybody who's been on chemo, for anybody who's gone through radiation and things like that, suddenly, reading, watching TV, anything that needs the brain, the mental mind, it becomes difficult. It became very difficult for me. So I shut all of that off. I wasn't hardly ever on the computer. I wasn't doing all of those things. So I had nothing but
Mm.
me. So in time, I started realizing moments before the phone rang that it would ring and who it would be, because I didn't have all those distractions going on around me, that disconnected me from my true spiritual being presence.
Mm.
And yeah, so once you shut out those things, you introduce yourself to a higher level of you, because they're just distractions. Tons of screen time is a distraction. I mean, and
Yeah.
what has it done to our mental health,
Yeah.
over the years? So yeah.
What has it done to our mental health, and what has it done to our potential? You say on your website, for anybody listening who wants to go check out Barbara's website, disruptinggracefully.com. Anyway, there's this line that I found that I love. You say, every individual possesses an innate potential waiting to be unleashed. I'm going to say that again. Every individual possesses an innate potential waiting to be unleashed. What a fantastic line. Can you talk more about what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So in my experience, I have realized that we over compartmentalize ourselves. We put ourselves in buckets. And so we rely on our physical brain to run our lives, our brain. So when and I think from my experience, we're trying to make our brain do something it wasn't designed to do. So if you need to make a decision, what are we trained to do? We're trained to make a list of pros and cons, right? Now, our brain can only come up with what it has experienced in the past. And that experience could be a personal experience. That experience could be something we witnessed through some on TV, through somebody else. But our true potential is the knowing that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, having a physical experience.
Mhm.
And over time, the definition of human has limited us to physical rather than all that we are. So it's really, again, it's going back to those definitions, challenging those definitions, and recognizing that we're more than our physical bodies. We have our spiritual beings, and for this, I'll call it our higher self, our higher mind that we ignore. And it's our higher self that, and you can see, well, you can't on the podcast, but in my backdrop, I visit a lot of different countries and I go to different things, but I'm very into nature. And I see our higher selves as like a hawk that can see everything that we just can't see.
Mm.
So when we surrender to that higher self, to that higher being of ourselves, that's when we unleash our potential, because that hawk or that higher self can see things that our brain cannot see.
Barbara, that is important. And I kind of want to lean into this just for a little longer because I read, um, I'll be honest, I don't remember which book this came from, but I kind of, I'm reading like 12 books at once right now, I feel like, but one of them, I think it was Richard Rohr's new book. I don't know if you know Richard Rohr, but he's one of my favorite authors. And he, he talks about how we've changed the way we can understand things as humans. We've gotten so rational, so mathematical. I think he talks about sort of when Newtonian physics, sort of became the way of understanding the world. We started understanding the world through a basic math equation. We started seeing everything with our brain. I think this is your point, and stopped being able to feel or experience everything with our spirit. And this is a Franciscan, monastic saying this. So I think coming from a different tradition that you're talking about, but I love that you even said, I see our higher self. I think I'm getting this right. I see our higher self as a hawk who's above and can see everything, right? What a metaphor for understanding that so many of us have this sense that there's something inside us that can experience the world in a deeper way or in a way that we're somehow blocked. And you talk about that as your innate potential waiting to be unleashed. Man, that's a cool vision for me to use. Is it even as I think about how I approach people in my life, how I approach my family moments at the dinner table with my kids, right? Like there's probably some part of me that knows that there is a more whole way to be with my family. There's a more uh, I don't know the right words to use. There's a more spiritual way. I think a lot of people could pull a lot of different words from a lot of different traditions to name that sense inside us that you name as the hawk above you. I love that.
And I love what you just said about
Mm.
being whole, because that's exactly my point. Um, we cannot show up in wholeness until we recognize that we're spiritual and physical beings.
Mm.
And then our wholeness comes into place. That's when we show up fully, by integrating that higher self, that spiritual being, however you want to define it, into your everyday showing up, how you show up every day. And as far as the mathematical equations and everything go, I believe I am aligned to the fact that our universe is patterns. It's all mathematical.
Yeah.
But that's fine. But when we're only looking at it from what we can understand, I mean, I just don't see us in this lifetime ever understanding how intrinsic the universe is.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, but if we show up in that wholeness, we show up in a whole different way. And that's how we really disrupt, because we're showing up in wholeness. So we're showing up as a state of love, because our spiritual beings are love. Our spiritual beings are not um, judging us, defining
Yeah.
us, all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe this will take us into how one might do that or what tools people have at their disposal to be able to tap into something beyond, in addition to a rational mind, but be able to tap into their spiritual selves as well. I love exploring the idea of intuition. I think a lot of people understand their intuition in a lot of different ways, right? Some people connect the idea of intuition with the voice of God or with some higher power. Some people, I think, have been taught to not trust their intuition.
Mhm.
You are an intuitive. That's something you say you are. You claim that identity. What does it mean for you? And how do you find that most people understand intuition?
Yeah, it's very complicated.
Mhm.
And I use intuition really as just a way to open the door for those who are curious. So, in my experience, many people identify intuition from those moments where they get these hits that turn out to be true later. So, maybe we meet somebody and we get a flutter in our stomach and it turns out to be the love of our life, something like that. However, it could be other ways. We could be walking to our car, we could be leaving a shopping center, it's dark, we're walking to our cars and the lights are out in the parking lot. Our intuition is going to tell us be on high alert. But is that really intuition? No, it could just be, it could be our brain processing similar
Yeah.
circumstances that produce dangerous moments. So that's not true intuition. That's the brain processing what it already knows. So basic intuition is your brain giving you those signals from the past that we just talked about, because the brain only knows what it's experienced. So, my background is criminal justice, and first responders are known for having a sixth sense. They just are. And it gets stronger the longer you're in a profession. And that is because we have more experiences. It's not because they're getting more in touch necessarily with their higher self. It's having more experiences. So they have more experiences to draw from unconsciously. So what we have to do is we really have to be very careful to recognize that our intuitive hits might be bad programming. Could be. And which bad programming, the experiences that we've had, that leads to discrimination, bias, and so many other things that cause a further divide in humanity. So the whole concept of intuition is very tricky. So I just use that term because so many people are curious about it and we all have it. But again, it just opens that door to the conversation of the higher self. So when you're connected to your higher self is what's driving your bus, is what I call it. Who's
Mhm.
driving your bus? Um, and my higher self speaks to me in ways that sparks joy or excitement in my life. So I see it as like, oh, here's a breadcrumb, go this way. And sometimes it can be you're chasing the shiny things if you're not discerning.
Yeah.
But it's really about following through on your highest joy in each and every moment and just letting everything unfold. And that's your true intuitive nature, is when you're connected to that something that's bigger than you. It's not just your programmed mind. You have to be very careful because a lot of people will say, my intuition told me to do this. Probably not. It's probably your unconscious training. And we saw this a lot like after 9/11. That
Mhm.
was a really big one. Suddenly, everybody had intuitive hits that they needed to call 911 because
Mhm.
somebody looked different than them. And so we have to be very, very careful where we go with that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've got two thoughts on my mind. The first is I want to just ask you, can you just tell me more stories? Tell us more stories about how intuition shows up in your life or how, like, real ways that you've used it. But the other thought I've got going on in my head is bad programming is such a simple phrase and a really important phrase. And I think it also allows anybody listening to sort of look at the phrase of bad programming to ask, what things in my life might be from bad programming, right? Especially from traumatic things in my past that now I'm overcompensating away from people, or I'm overcompensating because I've been hurt. And all of us carry around hurt and scars and sometimes open wounds from those traumas in our past that have programmed us in a way to protect us. But
Mhm.
often that programming keeps us away from our fullness, our wholeness, and from connecting with other people too. Um, anyway, that thought popped up. I think especially, we have a lot of listeners who are deconstructing their faith. Maybe they were in a high control religious environment in the past and are just reimagining the way they understand faith and spirituality. And I think bad programming is just a really interesting phrase to set down in front of you and to consider what am I carrying around? How am I acting out of some bad programming from the past? I like that a lot.
Yeah, and I call it bad programming, but actually the bad program can be a gift and usually is a gift
Mhm.
because if we don't recognize something, if we don't experience something, we can't recognize what we do or do not want to have. So it always leads us to a higher level of showing up in the world. But so I'm working on a book that's called How to Be a Disruptor with Grace.
Mhm.
And we talk about in the book, well, it's me, but I talk about we because it's all of me in the book of how to do that. And I look at my life from I showed up 4 different states of being. I showed up as a victim. I showed up as false empowered. I show up in a state of wholeness, or I can show up in that state of multidimensional me.
Mhm.
So yeah. And we could go really down the rabbit hole with this, but the most of the time I see 3 states of being. We're in victimhood, the world is happening to us. My parents did this to me, so now X.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a choice to stay in that, and you love on whoever wants to be in that. It's not up to us to change that.
Yeah.
We can show them different ways of viewing or perceiving. That's up to them. False empowerment was the getting the PhD, checking off all the boxes, getting all of those things, that outer things that make us feel empowered. They're not really making us feel empowered. It's a false sense, because when I was in the hospital, I didn't have my house, I didn't have my car. My husband lost his job, lost our health insurance. We had to sell the house. Um, all of the things that I identified myself as on the outer fell away. And I had nothing left but who am I and how am I going to show up in this world?
Mm.
And that's when I started stepping into that full state of wholeness, because I was always either showing up for the spiritual groups. I had to shut down criminal justice bar because they saw me as too masculine oriented.
Mm.
And in, criminal justice bar, I had to shut down the spiritual because that was too woo-woo.
Mhm.
And which you can't. To show up in wholeness, you integrate all of who you are, whatever those sides are. You show up fully. You don't wear masks for other people, and that appeasing of other people just sends us further and further into divide within.
Do you feel like, do you encounter people who are just absolutely terrified to know their real self and have leaned so heavily on those outer, you know, you know, degrees or jobs or outer parts of their life that
Yeah,
they have no idea what they'd find if they looked inside there.
right. Yeah, because our brain, our ego is designed to keep us safe.
Mhm.
It's designed to keep us safe. You do what's safe. Over and over and again, I hear things like, I can't do this because. Okay, question it. Why can't you do that? Because why? And a lot of times you get down to just that, again, that programming. I can't do it because I don't have enough money. Well, guess what? A lot of times money shows up when you just trust, hey, I'm supposed to go this way. It feels really good. It's my highest joy. I feel like I need to go that way. I don't think there's a supposed to or a must or anything like that. That's probably the wrong words to use. But when you're following your joy in a certain direction, things unfold for you. You don't have to
Yeah.
figure out the how, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Um,
and that pulls you into that wholeness. The more you live in wholeness, the more those synchronicities show up, the more it's just a repeating pattern, just like Facebook algorithms.
yeah. Yeah.
Our life is the same exact thing. What we're putting out, we get back. So, what we're observing on Facebook, we get back the exact similar types of things.
Yeah. Ooh, that is a difficult truth to confront for me and a lot of people, that our life is far too similar to the algorithms that social media frustrates us with all the time.
Exactly.
I want to turn our conversation to, I mean, a big part of what this podcast is all about is how people can create more moments of sacred human connection, of connection that feels like it transcends the ordinary. Uh,
Mhm.
you've talked about intuition, which I can imagine might be a tool to help people connect on a deeper level.
Mhm.
You also, uh, I know in the way that you describe your work, you say you work as a coach that weaves together scientific and spiritual practices. And I'm sure you got some stories of connecting with people on a level that seems to transcend some of those ordinary interactions we're used to. Are there any that you could share with us?
Sure. Yeah. Once we get out of the ego of what we should do, and then we can step into the higher potential, that opens the door. So, like in my work, we do the traditional mindset, beliefs, all of that stuff. But then we can take a whole bunch of different journeys. Like we can literally go on a journey to meet your higher self where I call it the soup of consciousness, where
Hmm.
it lives. And the higher self's not outside of us. So that's one thing that we have to remember. It's not outside of us. I might see it as a hawk, but I am all that is. You're
Hmm.
all that is. We're all that is. When we realize we're all that is, we show up differently and we look at each other differently.
Hmm.
So for me in the criminal justice system, when I look at somebody who's been accused of a crime, I still see them as that whole being underneath layers of labels and things like that. So it's really about how we show up and how we perceive ourselves. So if we are showing up in love, we perceive others from that state of love.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an important comment. If we show up in love, we perceive others through that state of love. That is, I find myself going back to that simple sort of dichotomy of love, living out of love versus living out of fear. And I think you can find evidence of that in ancient texts from multiple faith traditions. And I think it's also just something that we know or we can sense that there
Mhm.
are, I'll just say, there are moments in my life that I am operating out of fear. Very upon reflection, it's very clear that I am operating entirely out of fear. And there are moments in my life when I think if I reflect on them, I would say courageously, I'm operating out of love. I'm choosing to just plant my feet firmly in the mud of love, no matter how difficult it is.
Mhm.
That's a really hard thing for people to do. What gets in the way of that, based on your perspective? What is that?
It's our ego keeping us safe.
Yeah.
And we can't get upset at our ego. Our ego has a job to do and it does its job very well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we have to like rise above that and recognize, okay, you're keeping me safe. What are you keeping me safe from?
Mm.
If I step out of the cage, will the tiger come and eat me?
Yep.
You know, and probably not. Um, Today's standard, we look at it a little differently. We might be ostracized from the community. And I came up against that when, I started on my master's program and I was talking about the concept of free will. And our whole system is based on the concept of free will. And I said, I challenge that concept of free will because we're so programmed
Mm.
to behave a certain way. We're not taught to think critically, to think abstractly. We're not taught to think outside of, you know, X equals whatever.
Yeah.
We're taught to follow specific rules. So if we're not taught to think as individuals, how can we really have free will? Because we're programmed to behave the way we're taught to behave. And then I took it a little bit deeper and I started talking about, I think there's a higher plan for us when we come here.
Mm.
And so do we have free will as an individual? Perhaps if we ignore that higher guidance that's coming in, um, But yeah, but I came up against a lot of that because they said, no, 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 this is the way it's done, and this is the way it's always been done, and you don't bring that woo-woo crap, is what my professor told me.
Mm,
I said, it's not woo-woo, it's real. It's just and for me, it was just I was very expansive in the way I thought.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I really love doing this podcast is because I'm talking with people from a wide range of spiritual languages. I think that's an easy way to think about it, right? And if people listen closely to what you're describing, it is all the same questions, and for that matter, I believe the same metaphors that show up in Christian tradition, that show up in Buddhist tradition, that show up across the faith spectrum. These are not, you're, I love that you named that your professor, I think you said it at the time, just called it woo-woo crap and dismissed it entirely as though it was um, uh, silly. And I'm sure you've come up against that in other moments of your life. But I think so many people do who want to tap into some spiritual side, they come up against it. And so we create these structures that make it acceptable in polite public company. We often call that religion. And so we can say, oh, well, I put a name on it. I'm a Christian. I'm a Buddhist. I'm Jewish. I'm whatever. And that allows me to wear a name tag to make my woo-woo crap safe in public company.
Yeah.
And when people start talking about it in new metaphors, in new language, in new symbols, it becomes, for some reason, it becomes silly to people because, and I'll go back to something you said. Here's me just philosophizing for a moment, but I think the reason it people dismiss it is because our ego is protecting us from our deep seated fear of not belonging to a group anymore. We are so uh, evolutionarily designed to make sure that we stay in a group because that is how we are safe as humans. And so that becomes this blockage for us from exploring maybe our full spiritual selves, which is so ironic because I think our full spiritual selves would drive us back to a group, would drive us back to meaningful, real connection with other humans. And there probably is. I'll just ask you this random question since I'm ranting right now. Uh, can we be whole without connection? Can we be full? Can we be multidimensional? I think is a phrase that you used. Doesn't it require us to be with others, to be connected, to understand our interconnectedness amongst our world and amongst the people in our world? Sorry, I got a little off script there, Barbara, but I'm curious what you think about that.
That's a real deep question. And as you were speaking, I'm just shaking my head in agreement like crazy. So for me, everything is energy.
Hmm,
So other people do not have to understand where I come from for me to feel like I'm part of the whole.
hmm.
I don't have to feel connected to them. They don't have to understand me to be connected. My family accepts me and loves me for who I am, but I'll tell you right now, they don't get any of it.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't get any of it. So yes, we can still feel connected. It's when we attach to the thoughts, the beliefs, or the opinions of others that creates a
Mm,
disconnected us. So we can't be our whole selves and rely on what other people feel and think to define who we are, because then we're defining that we can't be connected because they don't get us. Does that make sense?
yeah, I actually think that's really important. I'm going to use some of the language that I often use here in our between community, but I talk a lot about the power of uncertainty in my life. The power of the most practical application of that is the power of curiosity. But uncertainty goes deeper for me than just asking good questions. It also means being able to connect with somebody without attaching to, without play, without the idea that you and I are connecting doesn't mean that I have to agree with, attach to, or espouse anything that you're saying, thinking, or feeling. but I can still connect with you. I can live in the uncertainty and just exchange energy with you and be with you and be next to you. And there's part of me that thinks that so many faith traditions are really aiming us to just be able to do that, to not attach to the outwardness of you, right? To your titles or your opinions or the things that you tweeted about 5 years ago or your political party, but to be with you nonetheless, purely human. Anyway, I think that's part of what I mean when I think about the deeper idea of living in uncertainty. Because certainty is me saying, oh, you and I agree about that thing. We use the same words and we wear the same t-shirt about it. And so therefore we can be friends. But I had a friend who used to say that uh, things that we have in common, the commonality is not connection, it's coincidence. Commonality isn't real connection, but that's what a lot of people think connection is oh, you like sports, I like sports, you live in Colorado, I live in Colorado, therefore we are connected. No, there's something underneath that if we're doing it right.
Mhm. Exactly. And so, not to go down too far down the rabbit hole here, but like we have a lot of training now in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's like the big, and I think it's a beautiful thing to understand people differently. I mean, I travel all over. I'll be in Peru in April, I'll be
Yeah.
in Egypt in May. I love learning about cultures. I'm a social scientist. But when we're identifying ourselves based on those labels, we're creating false connection in the workplace. And I just went through a training recently where I had to be with a group, and what made us similar? Oh, you know, 50-plus-year-old female,
Yeah. Yeah.
all of these different things. And we never went to that deeper connection. And I think that's where real change happens, is when we're connected at that deeper level.
Yeah.
And some people were getting offended by the thoughts of others. And I'm like, it's not about being offended. It's about honoring that we all come from a different perspective. And
Mm.
that's the beauty of the human experience.
Yes.
It's all these different perspectives, and there's no right or wrong. Your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth, but I don't put you at a different level or a different hierarchy. I don't see you beneath me. I don't see you above me. We're just all here experiencing this beautiful earth the way we're experiencing it.
Yeah.
But we have to choose how we're going to experience it
Yeah.
from that wholeness or divide. And when we look, at the world right now, they're saying you have to pick a side. All of these wars going on. I don't have to pick a side.
Yeah.
I pick the side of human beings. I pick that side, and I would love for them to find harmony. They're not ever going to agree. These different sides that are warring, they will never agree. But can they find harmony and a balance in between their different perspectives? Is
Yeah.
that possible? Then I think that's what we need to strive for in life. It's not you're either with us or against us. That is old bad programming,
Mm.
and that needs to be done away with.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That is so applicable. I love that you're using world issues, wars, but also like, you know, our disagreements with our neighbors. It's the same
Yeah.
bad programming. It's the same thing that creates conflict in conflict heavy parts of the world as creates conflict in our neighborhood and in our home and in our workplace.
Absolutely.
I want to talk more about sort of co-creating the world in which we live. This is
Mhm.
something we talk about in between a lot.
Mhm.
One of our community agreements we named as the co-creation covenant, and that idea we try to remind folks that they are co-creating the culture around them, and that if we all work really hard and if we give ourselves and the people around us a lot of grace and forgiveness, we can co-create a culture of love. I really believe that. And I know there's a lot of people listening who really believe that. My sense is that you believe people co-create the world around them too. And that might be a big way that you help people understand how to create their world um,
Yeah.
to be healthier for them. What are little things you think people can do to create an environment around them that is loving, that is nurturing, that honors
Yeah.
their innate potential.
So, so I work a lot with people who are in burnout, and they're in burnout because they're giving of themselves constantly. And we found, and I've done the same for myself. When I actually got sick and ended up in the hospital, I was like, whew, I get a break. I'm getting
Wow.
a break.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so yeah, for me, I've realized it's always recognizing the micro moments, and you use the word in between, and it's the in between, the thoughts
Mm.
and in between our next actions that really that's where our connectedness comes from. It's those in between moments where we're out of our ego. I truly believe that we co-create everything with a divine timing. I do believe there's a divine timing. Like
Yeah.
when we look in our history, when we see different inventions, they popped up all over the world, even though we weren't talking to each other around the same time because the timing was right. So there's that mathematical pattern behavior creation going on behind the scenes. But so for me, and I think we don't have to work hard at being who we are. Again, it goes back to if we're coming from, if we step into that state of being from a place of love, we create through our being. So if we are love, we create love. And this kind of ties back to my criminal justice practices. I see that as our systems were created from fear and control.
Yeah.
And so the energy that you create from it flows through everything that you create. So when people say the criminal justice system is broken, the criminal justice system absolutely is not broken. It was created that way.
That's right. Yeah.
It was created that way. So now we have to step back and say, okay, what else can we create? We don't have to figure out the how. And that's the problem. We always want to figure out the how. The how is staying in our flow, in our moment, and things unfold. So I always start, whenever I talk to somebody, it's about understanding who we are, who am I, and how do I want to express to the world, and getting really, really clear on that. And each micro moment in your life, you evolve and you shift. And I don't mean about wearing masks to appease others. That is just that I don't even, that's just craziness at this point,
Mhm.
from my perspective, having lived that life.
Yeah.
Like, what did I do? I threw away all those years, and I didn't throw away all those years because if I hadn't experienced it, I wouldn't have recognized it as something I didn't prefer. So I just really feel like that we have to dive into who we are. We have to be in those silent moments to get those insights, to get those intuitive hits. For me, it's nature. I do everything in nature. I have this tape recorder on my desk that goes out with me, and I take walks every single day, and that's where I connect. I mean, if we just looked at nature, we would learn so much about ourselves.
Yeah.
How the trees and the plants, and they all connect to each other without a spoken language.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so much there. And if we don't learn to forgive ourselves, a lot of us carry these heavy burdens of, I shouldn't have done that. And if we don't give ourselves that grace and that forgiveness, we can never forgive somebody else.
Yeah. I love that you talked about going out into nature. I know you live in Colorado. I live in Colorado. It's part
Mhm.
of, if we live out here, this is something that we do. We go outside, we go on hikes, we spend more time outdoors than most people. And
Mhm.
I love that you talked about it as like, if I don't go out there, I I'll speak through my own belief framework, but I think those moments of quiet, silent meditation, quiet reconnecting with the earth and regrounding myself in the world around me and in creation and in nature, all of that to me is so important because if I don't, then I will fill those micro moments between interactions and between decisions in my social life, in my life with my family, in my life with my job, in my life with the volunteer work that I do. I'll fill it with the constant noise that which is the only thing I've absorbed, the noise of the busy world around me, the noise of the grocery store and the dinging and the notifications on my watch and on my phone and all those noisy things. of course, I would operate at that pace constantly. But for me, I need moments of prayer. That's been a helpful spiritual tool for me because it allows me to tune into a different frequency. It allows me to turn down the volume on all the other stuff going on in my life, and it allows me to have more content that is peaceful, that is love filled, to fill those micro moments between interactions so that I'm ready for them. I think I believe that faith and spirituality and any tools we use to understand the big complicated questions of life are all pointing us back toward each other. I believe that our togetherness has a gravity that pulls us toward each other. And I think that's what it's all supposed to do. But it does it in different ways and in different languages that speak to us at different times in our lives. And all it's trying to do is remind us to operate out of love. Is the best language we have. I love that. I want to go back to your criminal justice career. You have a PhD in criminal justice. You've got a
Mhm.
career in criminal justice. And actually, I love that you just named that the criminal justice system is not broken. It works exactly as it is designed. It was built out of fear. It was built to be full of retribution and punishment and to uh, uh, as quickly as possible take bad people away. That was the that's sort of the heart of it. And if we today redesigned it out of love, rooted in love, standing in the mud of love, if we were to re-engineer that whole system, would it be restorative? Would it be full of opportunities for reconciliation? It really makes me wonder about what the criminal justice system could be. And I'd just love to hear you talk about that more, just because it's an area of expertise for you.
I totally agree. Yeah, so again, it goes back to the energy that we create from, it goes back to that state of being. So it's always about recognizing the state of being from which you're creating, because your creation co-creates the culture, the systems around you. And, in the US, our remedy has always been, if something bad happens, we must make more laws and we must punish harder. And,
Yeah.
and that is just crazy to me because we're not that simple. It's not the same as don't touch a hot stove because you'll get burned.
Yeah.
It's not the same. At any given moment, we have more than 2 million people incarcerated in prison. 2 million people. And it disproportionately affects, minorities and people in poverty. And the system on some level, and I do believe it's that hierarchy puts individuals as threats. They
Mhm.
make them threats rather than people who have the same, they're all the same as us. We just,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, our system views people differently. And the hierarchy just drives me crazy. If we could
Yeah.
just dismantle hierarchies and see everybody eye to eye, eye to eye, pair to pair, heart to heart, everything would change. Again, it's that us against them, it's that power over. I really strive for a power within paradigm. And I think if we raised our children that way, if our communities were built around that power within, over time, things would change.
Yeah.
And we have to understand exactly what we've been saying this whole time. We're not always going to agree on how we get there or the views that we take, but we have to know that we're all worthy of the same life, dignity, and respect as the person sitting next to us.
Mm.
Nobody is less deserving.
Wow.
Um,
So much of what I want to do with this Between project is to help us not interact with each other as abstractions anymore, but instead as humans, one to one, like to see you fully, to understand you fully, to know and to give you full grace in for all the things that you show up with and all the pain that you probably carry with you and all the joy and all the innate potential, all that inner power that you have, to see that and to recognize it and to honor it. I think that's so much of what Between's about. I've loved this conversation, Barbara.
I'm really enjoying it too, because we're speaking in ways that we're seeing each other on a whole different level.
Yeah.
We're not seeing the personas that define who we are. We're seeing ourselves at that energetic level, each
Yeah.
other at that energetic level. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true connection.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
Barbara, you and I could talk about this for the next 3 or 4 hours, but
Yeah,
the first rule of podcasting is always leave them wanting more. So if people did want more, I think they could probably go to your. Will you remind us where people could go to learn more about you or to interact with more of your thought?
sure. It's disruptinggracefully.com. And they can also find me on Facebook at Barbara Ann Jacques or Instagram at disrupting_gracefully.
That's wonderful. I can't wait to see you there more. I can't wait for us to connect more and maybe go for a hike sometime and
Mhm.
recenter ourselves as we prepare to reapproach the people in our lives. Barbara, this is wonderful. I wasn't sure. I didn't know much about you. We'd interacted very minimally before, and so I was like, yeah, well, we'll just show up curious and see. And wow, this was. I want to say I am leaving with the image of a hawk uh, over me as a what a warm and power filled, but also expansive
Mhm.
tool to have that image that I'm going to walk away from this conversation with. Thanks, Barbara. I appreciate it.
Thank you. You are the hawk, remember. This has been amazing. I think it's been actually the best podcast I've ever been on, and I've been on many.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you. Mhm.
Hey, thanks to all you betweeners out there for listening to this episode of the Between Podcast. Make sure you visit between.church on the internet to sign up for our mailing list. That's probably the most important thing, our email list. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. You can check out our 5-minute sermons, 5-ish minute sermons that we post every week. Follow us on social media. We got daily prayers. We got all sorts of other content. And join our community fully. We invite everyone. You are welcome here, no matter who you are or where you're from, no matter what you believe or even if you believe, no matter who you love or how you love, no matter what anybody else has ever told you about you. You are welcome and loved and celebrated here at Between. You know, my favorite church is the space between people. Now go with God's love and create the church between.